Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Ever since the trailer for Avengers Doomsday released, I've been pretty much obsessed about it. Getting Steve Rogers back after all this time, it's a different kind of emotion. That last shot from the trailer has been etched in my mind, and I absolutely can't wait to see him don Cap's suit. But as much as I screamed over his return, one question bothered me. How did Steve return to the present timeline? Because the teaser we got on him before this trailer showed him prepping to get the Best Dad award. Then, how did he suddenly know Thor needs his help? Well, I don't know exactly what Marvel's cooking up, but I do have some theories. And here they are. Firstly, let's talk about how Cap might be the one responsible for the incursion, which is causing 3 different realities to collide and bringing Doctor Doom into the picture. So what is an incursion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Incursion refers to a catastrophic event where the boundaries between 2 dimensions or Earths erode and 2 realities go BAM! As a result of it, both realities might be completely destroyed unless one of the Earths is annihilated before the collision. And the MCU has established that multiversal travel, as in crossing in between different dimensional planes or alternate timelines, can be one of the primary reasons behind an incursion. Now, we all know what Steve Rogers did at the climax of Avengers Endgame. He chose to return to the past, to the 1940s, using the quantum realm time travel system, and built a life with Peggy Carter, and this decision disrupted the multiversal balance. It fractured reality and created a branched timeline for Captain America to build a home, which may have planted the seeds for the incursion that we see in Avengers Doomsday. The directors of Endgame were the brothers Anthony and Joe Russo, and Joe said in an interview with Entertainment Weekly, if Cap were to go back into the past and live there, he would create a branched reality. Back in the day, the Sorcerer Supreme gave an explanation behind branching realities and said removing any one of the Infinity Stones can cause the time flow to split. But Loki expanded on this view in the series, and any event which deviated from the sacred timeline could create a branch, which was called a Nexus event. If these were left unchecked, they could grow into entirely separate timelines, and it's the task of the Time Variance Authority, and He Who Remains, to prune these branches. That explains what Loki's doing in the trailer with his TVA identification badge. Now, if you look at the scene carefully, Loki is standing inside of a home, fidgeting with his ID, and in the background there are pale, yellowish curtains. The curtains, and frankly the vibe of the home, feels something very similar to the one where Steve Rogers was putting his baby in the cradle. The math is simple. Loki is in Steve Rogers' house, and that's probably why he has the badge. To explain to Rogers who he's become and how the multiverse is literally under his supervision. The thing is, how Rogers jumps across timelines and how he ended up on that park bench as an old man may have been debated by Marvel fans for years. But honestly, MCU has never really given us a clean explanation. It's probable that Rogers too is in the same reality as the Fantastic Four, that is Earth 828, and Loki goes to meet him and warn him about the upcoming threat. After all, he's a superhero, and in whichever reality he might be in, he still has the power to save that Earth and the multiverse in the larger picture. In fact, if Loki does explain to Rogers that he's the one responsible for whatever's happening, he sure as hell has a stake in it and decides to do what he does best, be a savior. Or it's possible the Cap is on a whole different Earth and Loki goes to meet him and seek his help on behalf of his brother, because at this point he's fully aware of what's happening in the multiverse. Of course, Loki did not sacrifice himself to just sit and watch the multiverse collapse. And if incursions are now putting the timelines at risk, he has every reason to recruit heroes from across the multiverse. So if Loki finds Steve Rogers alive in another reality, he's very likely to come knocking on his door. But how did he end up in Cap's home, whichever reality that might be in? See, as of Loki Season 2's ending, we know that he sacrificed his freedom, while Sylvie, Mobius, B-15, and the TVA all move on with their lives. He now sits on the throne and uses his own magic to weave all the dying timelines together and holds them in his hands. Loki has thus effectively become the keeper of the multiverse by taking the place of the temporal loon and transforming the branched realities into a vast tree-like structure known as the Yggdrasil. The implication was he was physically anchored at the center of the multiverse, but the MCU might explain in this movie that Loki has learned to project himself, much like Doctor Strange can astrally project, or how Kang can operate across time. Why am I blabbering about Loki's magical powers or the chances of MCU introducing a new mechanic that allows Loki to interact with others without abandoning the timelines? The possible explanation might be that Loki has learned to influence events across the multiverse without leaving his throne, and perhaps helps Steve Rogers return to Earth 616. However, the MCU has never shown Loki transporting individuals between timelines, so this is purely my headcanon. The better and more consistent explanation is that Steve uses the quantum realm and Pym particles one last time to return to the world he once left behind. I know fans believe that there was a crunch of Pym particles, but During the events of the time heist, Steve and Tony traveled back to 1970 to Camp Lehigh. Rogers stole additional Pym particles from Hank Pym's lab, while Tony took the Tesseract. And the MCU never established how many Pym particles he was exactly carrying at the end of Endgame. The Russo brothers told Empire magazine, "We can't see this narrative without his central role in it, basically. The special place he holds among the ensemble, he sort of retains that moving forward," which is great, but what does it mean for Sam Wilson now? And old Rogers passed the shield on to him, and he's now taken up the mantle of Captain America. Taking away the title suddenly would actually be very weird, no matter how much I want to see Rogers being the OG Cap that he was. Here comes another popular fan theory on Reddit, thanks to user BadNorth8892, that might finally explain what Cap is doing on the park bench. The theory makes a little more sense if we bring in old Steve's expressions at the end of the 2019 movie. When Sam asks him to tell him about his life with Peggy, Sam simply replies, No, I don't think I will. I don't think it's because those memories are personal. Rather, it's because telling Sam everything would spoil adventures that have already happened from Steve's perspective, but not from Sam's. That means the old Steve sitting on the bench has already survived Endgame, Doomsday, and Secret Wars, and has already watched Sam Wilson become Captain America, and hence he knows Sam was worthy of carrying the shield. Now, how does the theory get here? According to this hypothesis, at the climax of Avengers Endgame, Steve Rogers made a choice, and instead of using his final Pym particle to return to Earth 616 immediately, he decided to stay in the past and build a life with Peggy Carter. And that should create a branched timeline according to the Russo brothers' explanation and what we saw in Loki. But thanks to Banner, the MCU also made it clear that you cannot rewrite your own past, and traveling back would essentially mean your past becomes your future while your former present becomes the past. But here's where things get interesting, because it's possible that the Steve who stays with Peggy is not the same old Steve sitting on the bench just yet. He was simply Steve Rogers living out his life in that branched timeline. While the multiverse began collapsing because of Incursions with Doctor Doom entering the picture, Steve had to be recruited from that branched timeline to stop the crisis. Now, think about what that could mean. From Steve's perspective, the last thing he would remember was stepping into the quantum platform, and that Steve had not yet handed the shield to Sam Wilson. And suddenly he found himself alongside Sam, Thor, and the rest of the Avengers fighting against Doctor Doom. But we saw that Sam already has Captain America's shield. Guess why? Because Sam received it from an older version of Steve. This Steve was experiencing these events earlier in his own personal timeline. And that's only after the events of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars that Steve might be returning to Peggy's timeline. To Peggy and their family, he may have been gone for only a few seconds, even if he spent weeks fighting across the multiverse, because that's how quantum realm travel works. Remember when Sam asked how long it would take when Steve stepped on the platform, and Banner said, "For him, as long as he needs. For us, 5 seconds. Steve then lived the rest of his life with Peggy and grew old. He then used his final Pym particle to return to Earth 616 at the exact moment we see into Endgame and gave Sam the shield. However, for this theory to work, we have to consider 2 assumptions. 1, Steve has to survive the events of Doomsday and Secret Wars, because if he dies during either film, he can never grow into the elderly Steve we meet at the end of Endgame. 2nd, someone has to recruit him from his branched timeline and return him to the exact moment he left, and that's where my Loki theory ties in. But wait, there's yet another idea floating around, one I don't really agree with, but is worth mentioning. Some fans have pointed out the way Steve Rogers looked in the trailer is very different, especially the long hair. And if you think about it, this is not how Steve looked in the Doomsday teaser either. That's where the theory wheel gets a spin, and the question of whether this is all our Cap arises. What else could it be? Well, the answer is pretty negative, and I would absolutely not like to see this happening. The Rogers that met Thor is Hydra's Cap. To give you more context, in the comics, Steve Rogers is a villainous version known as Captain Hydra. In issue 1 of Captain America Steve Rogers in 2016, we first saw the evil Captain America in a major twist when he said, "Hail Hydra" at the end of the comic. But to know how or why he was created, we have to check out Avengers Standoff Assault on Pleasant Hill Omega, issue 1. It started with Baron Zemo standing before a bunch of captive S.H.I.E.L.D. agents with bombs tied to their bodies. Zemo ranted about manipulating the power of the cosmic cube, Kobik, to control them and their loved ones and turn them into slaves. But what is Kobik? Kobik is a sentient cosmic cube who takes the form of a young girl and possesses reality-altering power. During the Avengers Standoff storyline, the comic shows Kraven the Hunter spending time with Kobik at a fake tea party, while Fixer and Trapster arrive with a special containment device. When the device is activated, Kraven tricks Kobik into going closer to it, causing the device to trap her inside a small energy field. We fast forward a few pages, and there's a young Steve Rogers. How? Let's go to issue 2 of Captain America Steve Rogers, We actually see how Red Skull used Kobik to alter Steve's memories and implant a false backstory where he's always been loyal to Hydra. That's how he created Hydra Cap, and as part of this terrorist organization which sought world dominance. Hydra Cap committed severe atrocities, including taking over the United States, forcibly relocating Inhumans to camps, and even ordering the destruction of Las Vegas. So if the Steve Rogers we see in Avengers Doomsday's trailer is indeed Hydra Cap, what does it mean? It might mean that the real enemy here might be this Captain America, and in a way it would solve the continuity problems. But how did he pick up Thor's hammer? Because Mjolnir can only be wielded by worthy ones. Well, there have been instances in the comics, particularly in the Secret Empire narrative, where Hydra Cap managed to lift the hammer, because Kobik had altered the enchantment's inscription and changed it briefly. Mjolnir thus changed the spell of "whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy," to "if he be strongest." That might explain why the hammer initially served him until the real Steve Rogers appeared. Okay, in hindsight, this is making a lot of sense, and if Loki was indeed in Steve's home, it might be at the end of the movie where he would ask the real Captain America to come to Earth 616 and help his friends. Because we do know that Chris Evans is coming back in Secret Wars. Thanks to a clip shared by comicbook.com, we know that Evans said, "I start work on the next one in a couple months, so I'm in the next one. I can't tell you how much I'm in the next one, but I'm in it." Alright guys, that's all for today. Yes, we are all ecstatic about Steve Rogers returning, but the questions about how seem to be never ending. I hope these theories might give you all some answers, and feel free to share your own in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to Marvelous Videos, and be sure to ring that notification bell so the next time the Avengers assemble, you find out from us first. Stay safe, have a great day, and as always, stay marvelous.